Okay, so we will be taking a simple numerical today. The question given over here is a find range, network ID, host ID, broadcast address, right? For a given IP address. So I will be giving you a IP address. So the IP address is 201.20.30.40. Correct. Now what are the different things we need to find? We need to find a range, network ID, host ID, broadcast address. Correct. So the first important question is we must know the given IP address belongs to which class. Right now, as we all know, there are different ranges of class. So class A has a range between 0 to 127. Class B is from 128 to 191, and class C range is from 192 to 223. Right now, as we can see that this first byte of the given IP address is between 192 to 223. Thus, the class of the given IP address is a class C. Right till this, I think it is okay with all of you. So we are able to find out the class for this particular IP address. Now from the class we can know the default mask, right? This is also we are very much clear with for class C IP address. What is the structure of class C IP address? Say these IP addresses are of 4 bytes. So first 3 byte for it is my host ID part, correct? So it is my host ID part. Sorry, first 3 byte part is my network ID part, correct? And the last byte is my host ID. Fine. This we all have seen till now. So first 3 bytes is our network ID, host ID is the last byte. So to come to the default mask, what we do is network ID will be set as all ones. So when we write all ones, all 8 bits as 1, it comes as 255 dot 255 dot 255 dot 0, because the host part we will be writing as 0. So the default mask for the class C is 255.255.255.0. Fine. So this is fine for us, right? Now from this where we need to move, we need to find out a network ID, correct? Till now what we have seen? We have seen a class of a given IP address. Then we have seen the default mask for the given IP address, correct? After this we will be moving for a network ID. Now what is this network ID? What is this concept of network ID? Network ID, say take an example. Say I have a network, correct? Now this particular network is say a organization PQR. So the network for this organization PQR will be pqr.com, correct? So there will be one IP, right? A one ID which is assigned to this complete network to identify a network as pqr.com. So that is my network ID. Understood all of you? So that is going to give me a network ID. Now from a given IP address and a default mask, how to find out the network ID? Okay. So network ID is to be identified as IP address and with a default mask. That is going to give me my network ID, correct? So now this comes to as 201.20.30.40 and 255.255.255.0. Now here we no need to convert it into the binary format, because we know that when we AND any number with 1, the answer comes as that number itself, and if we AND any number with 0, the answer comes as 0. So this 255 is all ones, right? So over here when I AND 201 with 255, my answer is going to come as 201. When I AND 20 with 255, answer is going to come as 20. When I AND 30 with 255, again answer is going to come as 30. And when I AND 40 with 0, my answer is going to be 0. Right. So this is my network ID. Have you understood how to come to the network ID from a given IP address? So 201.20.30.0 is going to be my network ID. So this particular network, that is pqr.com, will be identified as 201.20.30.0. That is going to give me a network ID. Correct. So till now what we have found? We have found a class, we have found a default class, default mask, and network ID. Now the next part is we need to find the number of hosts, right? Number of hosts. Now, how many bytes are there for the host for the class C? There is this one single byte. One byte gives me the host for class C. Correct. Now, one byte is how much? 8 bits. So, it is going to be 2 raised to 8 number of hosts. That is going to be 256 hosts. Correct. So till here is clear for all of you. So number of hosts will be 256. Correct. But all this 256 host cannot be used. There are few hosts few numbers from the given host ID which are reserved. So reserved host IDs are the first and last one. Correct. So my first and last host IDs are reserved one. So what is my first host ID? So the first host ID will be is the bits of host ID part which is set to 0. Correct. So that will which is set to 1. Correct. So that will be my first host ID. Correct. Now which bits are reserved? See, when my host ID part. See, this is my host ID part. Let me go into details of it. Before this, we will go into details of this. So consider a host byte. So these are my host byte. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? 8 bits are there for my host ID. When I set all these 8 as 0, this will come as 0. So now this last byte as 0 is my network ID. Are you able to see this? This is my network ID as 0. So this is my reserved ID, right? When I will set all these bits as 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So this particular will be, this is also a reserved ID, and that, see, this is my reserved ID, and then this is also going to be my reserved ID, which is my, so this is also my reserved ID, correct, which is 255. Fine. So these two are my reserved IDs. Fine. Now these reserved IDs, the one is used for the network part, the another is used for the broadcast. We'll see in the about the broadcasting address later on. So first we will find out what are the different hosts. So how many number of hosts are available? So now number of hosts will change to 2 raised to 8 minus 2. So that will be 256 minus 2. That will be 254. So this will come as 254. So I hope this is clear with all of you. So number of hosts will be 254. Correct? So I hope this is clear with everyone, like how to find the number of hosts from the given IP address. So for a given network, ये network क्या है? pqr.com. Now for this particular network, that is 201.20.30.0, for this particular network, I can have total 256 minus 2 host attached to this network. इसका मीनिंग क्या हुआ कि ये जो नेटवर्क है pqr.com, ये जो इंटरफेस है नेटवर्क का, ये इंटरफेस को मैं कितने होस्ट कनेक्ट कर सकती हूँ, कितने वर्क स्टेशन कनेक्ट कर सकती हूँ? 254 वर्क स्टेशन आई कैन कनेक्ट टू दिस. सो दीज आर माई नंबर ऑफ होस्ट फ्रॉम द गिवन network. So now what will be the range for this host? So the range for this host will be from 201.20.30.1 to till where it goes? 201.20.30.254. Correct? So this is a range for my host. Correct? So in this particular network PQR, I can have the IP addresses assigning to different workstations ranging from 201.20.30.1 to 201.20.30.254. So this is all about the classful addressing. Over here, I got from IP address. From the IP address, I came to a class. From the class, I found the default mask. With the help of default mask and IP address, I got a network ID. Now, why this network ID is used? See, this particular network will be attached to something else, right? In a World Wide Web, we have something else to be attached to this network, say ABC, and say this particular network is identified with 223. Now, suppose this ABC wants to send some packet to this PQR, correct? This ABC wants to send some packet to PQR. Now, how that packet will be sent? Right? How it will happen? So it must know the IP address, network address of this PQR, so that ABC will be able to send a packet to PQR. And that's the reason we must know the network IDs, right? The network IDs identify, network ID identifies that particular network. Okay. Now this particular network ID and the default mask is with the router, because from the outside world, everything, whatever communication is there, it comes first to the router and then router forwards it to the given network. Correct? So this is all about why do we need a network ID. Now let's come back again to this reserved IDs, right? Now we have said that the last IP address is not given to the host. Why we are not giving the last IP address to the host? Because it is a broadcast address, right? This last IP address we don't give. We said it is reserved. The first address is reserved and the last address is reserved. Now first address is given to the network and last address is a broadcast address. Correct. Now there are two types of broadcast address. Now what are these two different types? The types are limited address and a direct broadcast address. Correct? There are two types of broadcast address. Now let's go and see what is this limited IP address or a limited broadcast address. Now whenever there are hosts, now suppose inside this PQR, right? Inside this PQR, I have this host, correct? These hosts, there are different hosts inside the PQR. Now these all hosts want to, suppose this particular host, say A, want to send a message to all remaining hosts from this PQR. Okay, so it is a broadcasting, right? So a host inside a network wants to send a message to all the hosts inside the network. That is my limited broadcasting. Understood, all of you? So what is the limited broadcasting? A message to the internal host in a network that is inside the organization. So that is my limited broadcast address. Correct. So this limited broadcast address is always this particular limited broadcast address is always as 255.255.255.255. Understood all of you? So inside the organization, whenever there is one packet rising with the destination address at 255.255.255.255, and when it reaches to the router, then router understands, see, it is a limited broadcast address. So this particular packet has to send to all the hosts inside the network, right, inside this pqr.com. So that is my limited broadcast address. Understood? Now let's see about the direct broadcast address. Right. Now again with the same example, say one of the host from this abc.com. See, one of the hosts from abc.com wants to send a message to all the hosts from the pqr.com, right? So this particular message is to all the hosts from the pqr.com, right? So how this is going to happen? What does it mean? abc.com का एक वर्कस्टेशन और एक मशीन ब्रॉडकास्ट कर रहा है एक मैसेज, किसे ब्रॉडकास्ट कर रहा है? एक दूसरे नेटवर्क है उसके सारे मशीन्स को ब्रॉडकास्ट कर रहा है, अपने खुद के नेटवर्क पे नहीं कर रहा है। सपोज खुद के नेटवर्क पे वो कर रहा हो ब्रॉडकास्ट, तो उसे कहेंगे हम लोग limited broadcasting, right? And the limited broadcasting IP address is 255.255.255.255. So that is okay with us. बट यहाँ पे क्या है कि यहाँ पे अनदर नेटवर्क है एबीसी, ये अनदर नेटवर्क का एक होस्ट दूसरे एक नेटवर्क पे pqr.com नेटवर्क के सारे होस्ट को एक मैसेज पहुंचाना चाहता है, विच इज ऑल्सो ब्रॉडकास्टिंग. सो इन दिस केस वी यूज द डायरेक्ट ब्रॉडकास्ट address. Over here we use a direct broadcast address. So what is my direct broadcast address? So in that case I will be using the network ID part as it is. आपका IP एड्रेस है उसमें एक पार्ट नेटवर्क आईडी का है, करेक्ट है? सो व्हाट वाज माय नेटवर्क आईडी पार्ट? नेटवर्क आईडी, सी हियर देयर आर 3 बाइट्स फॉर नेटवर्क आईडी पार्ट which is 201.20.30. I will be writing the network ID part as it is, and in host ID part I will be making all fields as ones. So when how many bits are there for host? 8 bits are there for host, and if I make all of them as 1, it will come as 255. So this is my direct broadcast address. So whenever abc.com का एक machine destination IP address 201.20.30.255 करके एक पैकेट बनाता है, and when it is reaches to the router of abc.com, what router will found? The router will see check that what is the network ID. So हाँ चलो इसका network ID अलग है, this doesn't belong to my own network, so it will pass on it on the outside world. So whenever it will reach to the router of this network 201.20.30 वाला network, when it will reach to that particular network, again it will analyze the destination ID. So once it analyzes the destination ID and when it finds 255, that is all ones at a host ID part, then it understands that this particular message is a broadcast message for all the hosts which are there in my network. Right? So this is my direct broadcasting. I hope you have understood the limited broadcast and direct broadcast. The limited broadcast is inside the network, and that and direct broadcast is from one network to all the machines of another network. Correct? So this is my limited broadcasting and a direct broadcasting. So what we have seen today is we have seen a classful addressing example. So when I get a IP address, some IP address from a classful addressing, first I will find the class for that IP address from the ranges which are predefined. So once I find the class, I will find out the number of bytes reserved for network and number of bytes reserved for host. From that I will be getting the default mask, because all the network bits will be set to 1 and all the host bits will be set to 0 for the default mask. From the default mask and given IP address, I will come to the network ID part. I will be doing an AND operation with the IP address and the default mask. So with that I get a network ID part, which is a ID of a router, or which is the ID of a complete network, say pqr.com. Now from here again I will find out number of hosts in a given network from a given number of bits for the host. So here my given number of bits for the hosts are 8 bits. So my number of hosts will be 2 raised to 8 minus 2. Why this minus 2? Because my first ID is reserved for a network ID and my last ID is reserved for broadcasting. Correct. So from here, then I moved to find out the limited broadcast address. So limited broadcast address is broadcasting inside the network, right? So that will be all ones, a complete address is 1. So 255.255.255.255. And when I go to direct broadcasting, it means from one workstation of a given network to another, to all the workstations of another network is my direct broadcasting. So in this case, I will be keeping the network part as it is and the host part will be converted to all ones, and that will be my direct broadcast address. So this is how we have found the range, network ID, host, broadcast address for a given IP address.